Good morning, everyone. This is the talk for Tuesday, the 22nd of September, and we continue looking, albeit somewhat superficially, at the book of Esther. Today, we pick up the story from when Queen Vashti has been banished and the king is given advice to begin to look for more concubines, and out of that to perhaps select a new queen to replace Vashti. And it's at this point that we are introduced to Esther and her uncle Mordecai, who is looking after her. Again, we can't help but think, certainly for myself, with my eyes and my way of thinking, to find how strange it is that the king and men can think that women are just things to be used. But it's the story that we read. It's what happened at that time in that context, and we may disagree with it. I do. And we may think it's wrong. I do. But it's the way it was. And what stands out for me is that I don't believe God supported it. I don't believe God would have done it this way, should he have had complete control in how things were to happen. But what I do see is that God works within the way of the world to bring about his purposes. And we see this happening. Esther is picked up because she is herself a very beautiful young lady, and she is put into the king's harem. We read that she it soon gains the favor of all the servants of the king. She is such a beautiful person and such a good-natured person. It leads naturally to her being groomed for 12 months, and eventually the king calls for, as it were, the next concubine to come and spend the night with him. We might thrill a little at the thought of that, but she goes for it willingly, trusting that somehow, somewhere, within all of this, God is at work. And he is, because we find that King Xerxes really likes Esther. And somehow, and for me, this is the sign of God's hand in all of this, not necessarily condoning what is happening, but neither condemning it, but working within it for God's ultimate purpose. Mordecai, Esther's uncle, is a senior person. He sits at the city gates. It's a sign of him being an important person. And he overhears of a plot to assassinate the king. And so he reports that to his niece, Esther, who is now the queen. And she reports it to the king, who investigates, discovers that this is true, and the two potential coup plotters are put to death. Later on in the story, we discover the king somehow conveniently forgets about this, but is reminded of it much, much later. God's hand at work in the story of Esther. Folks, how does this relate to you and me? Sometimes we find things happening that are not of our liking. We may disagree with it. We live in the world, and the world does not always follow God. But again, the underlying truth, God is in control. God will always bring about his purposes. We need to remain faithful and true to the word of God and to wait for God's timing to come about. So, folks, whatever it is in your life that you are unhappy with and which is against what you believe to be the will of God, and if you cannot change it, trust it to God in prayer and let God deal with it, because the story of Esther shows God will always deal with it. Folks, have a wonderful day.